They found the photographs in a copper box beneath the floorboards of the old Cranford estate in 1893. Not hidden by accident. Hidden on purpose. 6 portraits, 12 faces, all identical. The town coroner who opened that box wrote in his private journal that night, "I have seen something that makes me question the nature of inheritance itself." For 140 years, every daughter born to the Cranford family married her twin brother. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually married. Church ceremonies, legal documents, children born from those unions. And everyone knew. The neighbors knew, the county clerk knew, the minister who performed the ceremonies knew. But nobody spoke of it. Not to outsiders, not to the law, not even to their own children until they came of age. This wasn't folklore, this wasn't myth. This was policy. Family law. Written in blood and enforced with silence. Until 1876, when one twin said no. And what happened next didn't just break the pattern. It shattered 3 generations of carefully constructed lies and revealed why the practice existed in the first place. What you're about to hear is the story the Cranford descendants spent over a century trying to erase from public record. But the letters survived, the photographs survived, and the bloodline, well, that survived too, just not in the way anyone expected. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. This is the account of the Cranford line, a family that believed their daughters carried something in their blood that could not be allowed to mix with the outside world. A family that protected that secret through the only means they thought possible, keeping it within the twin bond. And a family that, when that bond was finally broken, discovered the secret was darker than even they understood. The practice began with Margaret and Michael Cranford in 1732. They were born on a February morning in Somerset County, Maryland, delivered within minutes of each other during a thunderstorm, so violent, the midwife later claimed she saw lightning strike the same oak tree 3 times without setting it ablaze. The twins were, by all written accounts, unnaturally similar, not just in appearance, but in gesture, in thought, in the way they would speak sentences the other had begun. Their father, Edmund Cranford, was a landowner of considerable wealth. Their mother, Constance, died in childbirth. The twins were raised by their father and a rotating staff of servants who rarely stayed longer than a year. In the family Bible, preserved now in the Maryland Historical Society, there is a notation in Edmund's handwriting beside the twins' birth entry. It reads, "2 made 1, God's design or God's test." When Margaret and Michael reached the age of 17, Edmund Cranford made an announcement that shocked no one in the household, but would have horrified the county had they known. His children would marry each other. He'd already secured a blessing from a traveling minister who asked no questions when presented with enough gold. The ceremony took place in the Cranford parlor on a November evening in 1749. Witnesses included only the household staff, all of whom signed documents swearing to secrecy. Edmund's reasoning, recorded in letters discovered in 1968, was chillingly specific. He believed his children possessed what he called the twin sight, the ability to know things they should not know, to sense events before they occurred, to communicate without speaking. He had observed this since they were children. He believed it was a gift from God that would be diluted, possibly destroyed, if either twin married outside the bloodline. His words, "What providence has joined in the womb, no man should separate at the altar." Margaret gave birth to 4 children, 2 sets of twins, in both cases 1 boy and 1 girl, both sets identical to their parents in that same unsettling way. And when those daughters reached 17, they too married their twin brothers. Edmund's theory was becoming family doctrine. The gift, whatever it was, seemed to pass only through these specific pairings. Any deviation, he warned, would end the line entirely. By 1800, the Cranford family had moved from Somerset County to a more isolated property in western Maryland, near the Pennsylvania border. They purchased 200 acres of forested land with a single access road. The estate they built there still stands, though it's been abandoned since 1952. Local historical societies refuse to give tours. When asked why, they simply say the building doesn't feel right. The isolation was intentional. Court records show the Cranfords paid premium prices for land nobody wanted, land considered too remote for profitable farming. But profit wasn't the goal. Privacy was. By 1815, 3 generations of twin marriages had occurred, and the family had developed elaborate systems to hide the practice from civic authorities. Birth records were falsified. The twins were registered in different counties, sometimes different states. Marriage licenses listed false maiden names for the brides. Witnesses were paid. Ministers were chosen carefully, usually men with gambling debts or failing congregations who couldn't afford moral objections. In one case, documented in county archives, a Cranford twin marriage was recorded as a union between cousins. The clerk who filed it noted in the margin, "Family resemblance is remarkable." But here's what makes this more than just a story of isolated corruption. The Cranford daughters were, by every account, extraordinary. They had no formal education, yet they could perform complex mathematical calculations instantly. They predicted weather patterns with uncanny accuracy. 3 separate accounts from the 1820s describe Cranford women diagnosing illnesses in neighbors before symptoms fully appeared. One diary entry from a visiting merchant in 1827 reads, "The daughter looked at me and said my lungs were filling with fluid. I thought her mad. The doctor confirmed it 2 weeks later. I should have been dead by spring." The family called it the knowing. They believed it intensified with each generation of twin unions. And they weren't entirely wrong. Medical records from the 1830s show something unusual in the Cranford bloodline. A Philadelphia physician who examined 2 Cranford children in 1834 wrote a letter to a colleague describing neural synchronization I cannot explain. When I pricked one twin's finger, the other withdrew her hand at the exact moment, though she was in another room and could not have known. This wasn't superstition. This was observable phenomenon. And the family had convinced themselves that breaking the twin marriage tradition would break whatever genetic or supernatural mechanism produced it. So the practice continued, generation after generation, always in secret, always justified as preservation of something sacred, until 1851, when Sarah Cranford was born. Sarah and Samuel Cranford entered the world on March 9, 1851, in the back bedroom of the family estate during a spring that locals still called the silent season. No birds sang that year. Farmers reported it in their journals. The woods were unnaturally quiet from March until June, as if nature itself was holding its breath. From the beginning, Sarah was different from the previous Cranford daughters. Not in ability, in temperament. The family records, meticulously kept in leather journals now housed in a private collection, describe her as resistant to instruction and troublingly independent. By age 7, she was reading books ordered from Boston and Philadelphia, philosophy, science, abolitionist literature. Her father, Marcus Cranford, confiscated these materials repeatedly. Sarah found ways to acquire more. Samuel, by contrast, was exactly what the family expected. Quiet, obedient, devoted to his sister in that total, consuming way that characterized every Cranford twin bond. He followed her through the woods on her long walks. He sat beside her during lessons. When she spoke, he listened as if her words were scripture. A tutor hired briefly in 1863 wrote to a friend, "The boy has no identity separate from his sister. It is not love. It is something more troubling. He exists only in her reflection." As they approached 17, the family began preparations for the wedding. The same traveling minister who had officiated the previous generation's ceremony was contacted. Documents were drawn up. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, commissioned a dress. But in January of 1868, something happened that the family never recorded in their official journals. We only know about it because Sarah herself wrote about it in letters that weren't discovered until 2003, hidden in the wall of a Baltimore boarding house. Sarah had been taken to Philadelphia by her mother under the pretense of purchasing wedding fabric, but the actual purpose was to meet with a physician, not for a medical exam, for a conversation. Eleanor wanted a doctor to explain to Sarah what the family believed about the bloodline, the inheritance, the gift. Eleanor thought a scientific authority might convince her daughter where family tradition had failed. The physician's name was Dr. Howard Marsh. He was 63 years old. He had delivered 2 generations of Cranford twins, and he had kept the family secret for 40 years. Sarah sat in his office for 3 hours that winter afternoon. What Dr. Marsh told her, what he showed her, changed everything. Because Dr. Marsh hadn't just been keeping secrets, he'd been keeping records, medical records, about what the twin marriages were actually producing. And it wasn't a gift, it was a defect, a genetic degradation that accelerated with each generation. The knowing the family prized so highly, it was a neurological abnormality. The twins weren't gifted, they were damaged. And Dr. Marsh had documentation proving that every Cranford child born from twin unions showed progressive mental deterioration by age 30. He had corresponded with physicians in Europe who had studied similar cases. Incestuous reproduction over multiple generations didn't create superiority, it created collapse. Sarah returned from Philadelphia in late January of 1868 and did not speak for 3 days. Her mother assumed the doctor's explanation had overwhelmed her, that she needed time to accept her sacred duty. Her father began finalizing arrangements with the minister. Samuel sensed something had changed in his sister, but he couldn't articulate what. He only knew that when he looked at her now, she wouldn't meet his eyes. On February 14, 1868, exactly 1 month before their 17th birthday, Sarah made her announcement. She would not marry Samuel, she would not participate in the ceremony, and she would leave the estate if they attempted to force her. The family reaction was not anger, it was terror. Not because Sarah was defying tradition, because they genuinely believed that breaking the pattern would destroy the bloodline entirely. Her father told her she would be ending 136 years of careful preservation. Her mother wept and said Sarah was killing something sacred. Samuel said nothing. He simply stared at his sister as if she had become a stranger. But Sarah didn't just refuse, she explained why. In front of her parents and her brother, she described what Dr. Marsh had shown her. The medical records documenting cognitive decline in every adult Cranford twin, the correspondence with European physicians, the evidence that their celebrated gift was actually a progressive neurological disorder. She told them they weren't preserving something divine, they were perpetuating damage, generation after generation of sanctified harm. Her father's response was recorded in a letter he wrote to Dr. Marsh, demanding an explanation. Marcus accused the physician of betraying the family, of poisoning his daughter's mind with lies designed to destroy their legacy. But Marsh's reply, preserved in the same archive, was unambiguous. He wrote, "I have watched 3 generations decline into madness by their 4th decade. I have watched your family mistake deterioration for enlightenment. I will not watch another generation sacrifice themselves to a delusion. I told your daughter the truth because someone needed to. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline?" The family tried everything to change Sarah's mind. They brought in the minister to counsel her. They restricted her movements. They had Samuel plead with her daily. But Sarah had made her decision. In her letters, she wrote, "They think I'm refusing a marriage. I'm refusing a grave. They've been burying their children alive for over a century and calling it tradition." On March 9, 1868, the twins' 17th birthday, there was no wedding. Instead, there was a family meeting. Marcus Cranford gave his daughter an ultimatum: marry Samuel, or leave the estate permanently with nothing. No inheritance, no family name, no support. Sarah packed a single bag and walked out that evening. Samuel watched from the window of their childhood bedroom. He never said goodbye. What happened to Samuel Cranford after Sarah left is documented in fragments: letters, diary entries from neighbors, a brief medical report from 1870. The picture they create is devastating. Within weeks of his sister's departure, Samuel stopped speaking almost entirely. He took meals in his room. He wandered the estate at night. Staff reported finding him standing in doorways, staring at nothing, as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. His parents initially believed he would recover. They thought time would heal the severed bond. They were wrong. By summer of 1868, Samuel's condition had deteriorated so severely that Marcus Cranford wrote to Dr. Marsh in desperation, begging for help. Marsh's reply was clinical and merciless. He explained that Samuel was experiencing what he called twin dependency collapse. The neurological synchronization that had developed between the twins since birth was not merely emotional, it was biological. Sarah's absence had created a psychological and physiological crisis Samuel's system could not resolve. In September of 1868, Samuel was found in the woods near the estate, unconscious. He had been missing for 2 days. When he recovered enough to speak, he told his parents he had been searching for Sarah, that he could feel her calling to him, that if he walked far enough in the right direction, he would find her. Dr. Marsh was summoned. His examination notes, discovered in 1976, describe Samuel as functionally dissociating from reality and exhibiting signs of profound neurological distress, inconsistent with simple grief. Marcus and Eleanor faced an impossible truth. Their son was dying, not from illness, from separation. The very gift they had spent generations preserving was killing him. And there was only one possible solution. They needed to find Sarah and bring her back. Not for a wedding, for Samuel's survival. In October of 1868, Marcus hired private investigators to locate his daughter. It took them 3 weeks. Sarah was in Baltimore, working as a seamstress in a boarding house, living under the name Sarah Mills. Marcus went to Baltimore himself. The meeting between father and daughter was documented in a letter Sarah wrote to a friend years later. Her father didn't ask her to come home. He begged. He told her Samuel was dying, that the doctors said only her presence could save him, that she could refuse the marriage, refuse the family, refuse everything, but please, just come back long enough to stabilize her brother. Sarah's response, as she recorded it, was 5 words: "This is not my fault." But she did return. In November of 1868, Sarah came back to the estate, not permanently, for 2 weeks, to see if her presence would help Samuel recover. The improvement was immediate and terrifying. Within hours of Sarah's arrival, Samuel began speaking again. Within days, he was eating normally, walking the grounds, appearing almost like his former self. But only when Sarah was nearby. If she left his sight for more than an hour, the deterioration resumed. Dr. Marsh examined them both and confirmed what the family feared. The bond couldn't be broken without destroying Samuel, but maintaining it would destroy Sarah. The choice was impossible, and Sarah made it anyway. On November 28, 1868, she left the estate for the second and final time. She wrote a letter to her parents explaining her decision. The letter still exists. In it, she wrote, "You created something unnatural and called it sacred. You bound 2 souls together so tightly that separating them means death. That is not love. That is imprisonment. And I will not be my brother's cage, even if leaving means I become his executioner." Samuel Cranford died on January 3, 1869. He was 17 years old. The death certificate, filed in county records, lists the cause as failure to thrive. Dr. Marsh's private notes tell a different story. Samuel stopped eating, stopped sleeping. His body simply shut down, as if a vital connection had been severed and he no longer knew how to function independently. The last words he spoke, according to a housemaid who attended him, were, "She's so far away now. I can't hear her anymore." Sarah Cranford never returned to the estate. She never attended her brother's funeral. She lived the rest of her life in Baltimore under her assumed name, working as a seamstress and later as a bookkeeper. She married in 1874, not a twin, not family, a carpenter named Thomas Green who knew nothing of her history. They had 3 children. None were twins. Sarah died in 1923 at the age of 72. Her obituary made no mention of the Cranford family. But the Cranford line didn't end with Samuel's death. It ended with what came after. Marcus and Eleanor had no other children. The estate passed to Marcus's brother's family when he died in 1876. That branch of the Cranfords had never participated in the twin marriages. They had been quietly ostracized for generations for refusing the practice. Now, suddenly, they inherited everything: the land, the wealth, and the records. What they found in those records horrified them. Detailed documentation going back to 1732, medical observations, breeding charts, letters between family members discussing the twin marriages as if they were livestock management. and Dr. Marsh's correspondence, which Marcus had kept, proving he had known for decades that the practice was causing harm. The inheriting Cranfords made a decision. They would burn it all, destroy every record, erase the history, pretend it had never happened. But they missed something. In 1893, when the estate was being renovated, workers discovered that copper box beneath the floorboards. Inside were the 6 portraits, the photographs of 3 generations of Cranford twins on their wedding days, 12 faces, all eerily similar, all staring at the camera with the same unsettling expression. The workers who found it brought it to the county coroner, thinking it might be evidence of a crime. The coroner opened an investigation. That's how the story leaked. Newspaper articles from 1893 describe a disturbing marriage practice and questions of legal incest surrounding a prominent Maryland family. The Cranford descendants sued for libel. They claimed the documents were fabricated. The photographs were dismissed as coincidence. Poor rural families often had similar features, the lawyers argued. The case was settled out of court. The newspapers retracted their stories, and the Cranford family effectively disappeared from public record. They sold the estate, changed their names, scattered across the country. For over a century, the story was buried successfully, until 1998, when a genealogist named Patricia Holloway started researching her family tree and discovered her great-great-grandmother was a Cranford. Not from the twin line, from the branch that had refused to participate, but Patricia had access to family documents her ancestors had hidden. Letters, photographs, medical records. She spent 6 years verifying everything, cross-referencing birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data. And in 2004, she published her findings in a small academic journal. The story was real. The twin marriages had happened. The documentation was irrefutable. Sarah Cranford's letters were found in 2003, during the demolition of that Baltimore boarding house. They had been plastered inside a wall, possibly hidden there by Sarah herself. In them, she wrote about the guilt, about wondering if she could have saved Samuel, about nightmares where she heard him calling for her. But she also wrote about her 3 healthy children, about watching them grow without the shadow of the Cranford gift, about knowing she had ended something that should never have begun. The last letter, dated 1922, 1 year before her death, contains a single paragraph that explains everything. They believed they were preserving something precious. But you cannot preserve life by preventing it from changing. You cannot protect a gift by imprisoning it. What the Cranfords called sacred was simply fear. Fear of the outside world, fear of losing control, fear of discovering they were ordinary. So they married daughter to son, generation after generation, and called it devotion. But it was never devotion. It was just fear. And fear, when given enough time and enough silence, becomes indistinguishable from evil. The Cranford estate still stands in western Maryland. It's privately owned now. The current owners, who purchased it in 2009, report nothing unusual, no hauntings, no supernatural occurrences, just an old house that nobody wants to visit. Local historians know the story. They don't share it with tourists. When asked why, one historian told a reporter in 2015, "Some stories don't need to be remembered. They need to be warnings." But the warning wasn't heard. Genealogical research in the past 20 years has uncovered at least 4 other families in colonial America who practiced similar twin marriage traditions. None as extensive as the Cranfords. None as well documented. But they existed. Hidden in family Bibles. Buried in county records. Whispered about by descendants who don't quite believe what their grandparents told them. Sarah Cranford broke a pattern that had lasted 136 years. She paid for it with guilt that haunted her until death. Samuel paid for it with his life, but their story remains. Not as folklore, not as myth, as fact, as evidence that sometimes the most sacred family traditions are just wounds passed down through generations, and the bravest thing anyone can do is refuse to keep bleeding. If this story has stayed with you, if it's made you think about the secrets your own family might carry, leave a comment. Tell us what you would have done. And remember, the past isn't just history. It's a warning about what happens when silence becomes tradition, and tradition becomes prison. Thank you for watching.